Hi, Yusha. I'm on. I'm on. Just let me know when we can start. Maybe we'll give folks 1 or 2 minutes. I'm already on the call. Thank you.
Hi, Annie. Thank you. And I think we can start now. So it's over to you. Thank you, Annie, for coming to do the opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's session. Okay, I'm unable to start my video, so I'm just going to talk on audio. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Today promises to be another interesting section, and we will be looking at applying an intersectional gender lens on social innovation in health. This would be more like an introductory module, and we have two very excellent social innovators who will be introducing and taking you through today's lecture. We have, first up, we have Abigail Maya. She is a research associate at the Social Innovation in Health Initiative in Philippines Hub. She completed her master's degree in cultural anthropology and developmental studies from the KU Leuven, Belgium. She's worked for the last 6 years in various areas of the developmental sector, and her recent research interest now includes feminist and decolonial approaches to development, gender, and intersectionality, and also transdisciplinary research. So she has a lot of expertise in the topic. And we also have Dr. Pauline Marie Tianko. She is a medical doctor by training and also a public health practitioner. She currently works as a project associate also at the CHI Philippines. Her work mainly focuses on implementation and social innovation research, evidence and research capacity strengthening. She also uses gender intersectionality lens, community engaged strategies, monitoring and evaluation of public health programs, and co-designing climate and resilient health systems. So together, they will be taking us through the topic of applying an intersectional gender lens on social innovations in health. Just before we dive into the topic and I give them the floor, just some brief ground rules. So you could see on the screen how to use the captions. If you want the different languages, you could select the language of your choice using the description being pictured now, and then you can set it. We know it's a diverse audience, and you could also use that. Next slide, just to go through some other rules. So would encourage everyone to keep your microphone muted. However, the sessions will be interactive, so you could use the chat functions, and if there's call for people to speak, you could raise your hand, but as much as possible, keep your phones muted when the speakers are talking. If you have questions, type directly into the chat box and the team will be able to respond. Yes, so unless you're called during the moderating session, please keep your microphones muted. We ask that you respect all the participants' views and opinions. Use names that we can use to identify you. So if you're logged in as your device or brand name, please change it to your own name so we could know who you are. Feel free to intro yourself in the chat. Find good internet connection so you remain connected throughout the entire session. All the PowerPoints will be available on the training website within 24 hours, so you could go through and download whatever slides you're interested in. We wish you a very, very, very enjoyable time in today's session. If you have any questions, please do well to email Yusha. The email is down here as well. So at this point, I'll take a stop and hand it over to Dr. Paul and Abigail. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Inei. So Dr. Inei is one of our consultants for this workshop, and she has been helping us a lot in the process. So thank you very much, Dr. Inei. So I would like to welcome all the participants. Thank you for taking time to be here with us as we teach you or as we discuss the application of an intersectional gender lens on social innovations in health. So from the title itself, you could already pick out important elements such as intersectionality, gender lens, and social innovations in health. And since this is a pretty short workshop, so it's gonna take only an hour, we don't expect you to be experts at the end of the workshop, but we do want you to have a better understanding of these terms and an appreciation for the strategy. So I am here with Abby. The first part will be more or less about definition of terms, operationalization, and the next, that's where we see all these terms closely tied to each other. Okay, so before we deep dive into that, let me just show you the objectives of the course. So this course seeks participants to understand gender, gender dimensions, intersectionality, and intersectional gender analysis. We also want you to have a basic knowledge about how to apply the intersectional gender lens in analyzing social innovations in health. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we understand the concepts more, we first have to define them. So we have social innovation first concept. So these refer to novel solutions created and implemented by a range of actors in response to a priority health need within a certain geographical context. So when we talk about solutions, this may come in the form of a process, it could be a product, a practice, or even a market mechanism. And what's unique about social innovations in health? So this is for the benefit of those who might not be very familiar with the term of social innovations in health yet. What's unique about social innovations in health is that, contrary to the traditional definition of innovation, this is not done in pursuit of newness or for profit margins, but with the intention of improving the quality of life of community members. So we want to incite positive social change through a community engaged process. So there's co-creation with a lot of stakeholders involved. And just to give you an idea or a concrete example, this social innovation is actually going to be discussed by Abby later. But I think at this point, it's important to already really understand what social innovations are. So let me give the example. So we have a social innovation called the RAM Pump Project. So this was organized and implemented by the organization Aid. Okay, so ADP noted that there were certain parts in the Philippines with no access to water. And this community, so their community members, they live in the upland areas. And in order for them to have access to water, they have to travel miles and they have to go down a steep path. So the women and children are usually the ones assigned to fetch water. And this really takes up a lot of their time. And apart from this, it also poses security and safety threats. There's also the issue of bullying among children because since they have limited access to water, they cannot take a bath every day. So those are the issues surrounding that. And so because of these problems, AIDFI decided to introduce an old innovation called the RAM pump. So the RAM pump is a mechanical pump, so there's no need to use fuel or electricity, and it is made of locally sourced materials which work for the community because it's situated in an upland area and access to fuel or electricity is also not very stable. And AIDFI also trained the locals to repair the RAM pump in case it gets broken. So that has important implications in with sustainability. They also helped the community form a local water association. So they now have a say in decision making. And essentially, it was already the community that's managing the entire social innovation. And because of this, children and women no longer had to walk and to trek, so they had more time to do other things. So the children were able to focus on their studies and they were able to play more. And women, they became business people, they became leaders of their community. So it opened up a lot of opportunities for them. And here we see that social innovation, so in trying to resolve a health need, they were also able to address and incite social change, which could be and has been sustained by the community members themselves. Okay, so now that we have a better grasp of social innovations, it's time to define more terms. So the first we have is gender. But before we deep dive into these terms, we would want to know what you think of when you hear the word gender. So you can opt to scan the QR code, or you could click the link that has been sent to the chat box. That will take you to the Mentimeter site, and please do type in your thoughts. So we would want to limit it to one word per person, because we have a big group right here. So I'll be giving you 3 minutes. Again, what comes to your mind when you hear the word gender? So we have answers coming in. Yes, social construct, culture, no discrimination. So we'll give people more time. So we're also having some answers in the chat. Okay, we have some say it's male or female or sex. Okay, we have equity and roles in the mix as well. We have inclusion, being equal. Thank you. So we now have a pretty complex word cloud. And it's interesting that sex is in the middle. So later on, we'll see how these things are distinct from each other. Identity, yes. We have behavior. Okay, I think people have already typed. So to those who just came in, you can still catch up. What comes to mind when you hear the word gender? Okay, so I think I can wrap it up. So I think a lot of you entered sexual orientation, roles, identity. We also have expression, inclusion, synonyms of inclusion as well. Okay, so thank you. We okay, there you go. So we have gender. Gender refers to the socially constructed characteristics of women, men, and non-binary identities. So this may refer to norms, roles, and relationships of and between these groups. So as I mentioned earlier, gender is socially constructed and it is relational. So thank you for those who answered. It shapes how men, women, and people with non-binary identities interact with each other and the world around them. So because it is a social construct, gender frequently varies through time, through seasons, through context, as individuals construct differing roles and identities that are shaped by a variety of factors. So this could be shaped by political, social, and economic circumstances. But you might be wondering, how does gender relate to health? So gender as a power relation shapes vulnerability or risk of disease. It also affects one's access and utilization of health services, and ultimately the entire disease experience. So just to give you an example of how these two are connected, gender and health. So there are still places in the Philippines, for instance, who put women in charge of tending the home, of doing household chores, of taking care of their children. So if this is the case, then women might not be open about going or accessing health services because one, they don't have the financial means to do so because they do not work. And two, because no one's gonna be left or no one's gonna take care of their children. So that's how we could explain, or that's how we see the interplay between gender and access to health services. Okay. And then we have another term, sex. So this was also pretty big in the word cloud we had earlier. Sex refers to the biological and physiological characteristics of males and females. So sex is more anatomical. It is fixed. So it has male, female, and then intersex as well. And it is important to note that while sex and gender are interlinked, sex does not necessarily define gender. So I know that it's sometimes interchanged by some people, but it is important to make that distinction between them. Okay, and now I introduce you to the gender unicorn. So it's a pretty cute illustration. So this illustrates gender. And let me just orient you with the symbols that we have here. So we see here an arrow or a line, and we see that there are also dots. So for gender identity, for gender expression, physical attraction, and emotional attraction, these are represented by lines or arrows because these are items that run or occur on a spectrum. So they're more or less fluid. While for sex, it's a dot because it's fixed. Okay? And so just to give an example, gender identity is something fluid. So it depends on how one thinks of their gender identity. You might have also heard of the acronyms LGBTQIA+, or SOGS. So LGBTQIA stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and asexual. So the additional plus sign at the end is meant to represent other identities not encompassed in this pretty short acronym. And then we have the term SOGS. So this means sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and sex characteristics. So just keep these terms in mind because later on they will be mentioned again. And in the Philippines, we have our own version of the gender unicorn. So this is gender Malaya. In Filipino, Malaya translates to free. So you would notice that we also have sex as being male or female. We have sexual orientation, we have gender identity, and gender expression. Now we go to another important term. We add another term into the mix. We have intersectionality. So we will be doing the same activity. So please click on the Mentimeter link again. And now answer the question of what comes to mind when you hear the word intersectionality. I know it's a bit hard to think of a single word to describe this, but there are no right or wrong answers, so feel free to type in your thoughts. So these are great answers. Multiple factors, context, relationships, multiple identities, overlap. I like that. Crossing, in between. From the chat, we also have nationality. Okay. Yes, the idea of multiplicity, of an ecosystem. Yes, we have layers. And we also have discrimination in the mix. So later on, not to spoil, but it's gonna manifest in how we describe the practical implication of intersectionality. So you can continue answering. We have 41 responses, plus those that we have in the chat. There are around 139 participants. So keep them coming. Again, there are no right or wrong answers. We just really want to get the sense of how you understand the word. Okay, we have here fluid. Yes. We have power structures, power relations, interconnection. have communication, we have disadvantage, we have overlap, okay, experience. So I think our time is up. So thank you for your inputs. Majority answered mixed, overlap, context, relationships. These are very good insight, by the way. Interconnection among multiple identities and diversity. Okay. So now, just to break it down a bit more, we will be hearing from a group of kids.
Yes. You want me to sing it? Yeah. So intersectionality is a concept that allows us to realize that people live like multidimensional lives. So for example, if someone is a Black woman and they're Black and they're also a woman, it's important to look at the possibility that they may experience sexism as well as racism at the same time.
So are you saying that like say sexism is not experienced by like everyone in the same way?
Exactly.
Thinking about and being conscious of the fact that we have a bunch of different things that make up our identity. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Because I'm light skinned, people think that I'm white, but I'm First Nations. Intersectionality also is like a big puzzle from your toes to your head, tip top of your head. I don't know, I don't understand what this is actually meaning. Every single part that in you has to make you you. Oh, no, I get it. I get it now. So people aren't just the one picture. The whole picture basically has to mean your whole entire personality going together to make you.
Oh, thank you. That's really cool.
Okay, so I hope that was helpful.
Yes, because boys have to do this.
Okay.
Boys can go to this specific club to have this certain amount of Pokemon cards to be in this club. And that's basically what it goes like.
All right. Thank you, Abby. So from that, we can say that intersectionality refers to the interconnectedness of our identity social categorization. So with social categorizations, we mean gender, sex, class, age, cultural background, among others. So it is also an analytical lens that examines how different social stratifiers interact to create different experiences of privilege, vulnerability, and marginalization. And then let me just show you the intersectionality wheel. So this was adapted from TDR. So we see gender in the middle. Let me just orient you. So we have gender in the middle. It serves as the entry point. And then we have here three layers. The innermost layer refers to personal characteristics such as socioeconomic status, religion, ethnicity. And with this, we have a wider layer or a bigger layer. We have classism, sexism. So these are mostly social factors, which are enveloped by the structural factors that we know as economics, politics, the legal system, and the educational system. So in practice, the wheel helps us think about intersectionality in practical ways. So it shows us how multiple individual characteristics interact. For example, age, how it interacts with social structures and like war or the legal system. And for a concrete example, for instance, when we want to create diverse and inclusive spaces, for instance, at work or in public areas, we should be open minded enough to be willing to think about differences in power, differences in oppression in increasingly complex ways. So it gives us a how multiple identities intersect and produce our understanding and eventually shape our experiences and our views of the world. So, for instance, poverty and low social economic status can lead to poor or overcrowded living conditions. So, this enhances the risk of transmission of certain diseases such as leprosy or Ebola. Then, gender roles also interact with the environment. So, if women are still in charge of doing household chores, then they are most likely to be exposed or they are most likely to do the dishes in infected waters. So they might have higher infection rates in some settings. So, for instance, schistosomiasis. And another factor now is climate change. So, climate change, as we know, is a threat multiplier. It leads women to face increased vulnerabilities. And it's actually ironic that around the world, women depend more on, yet have less access to natural resources. So, disproportionately, women have the responsibility to secure food, water, and fuel. And in low-income countries, the agricultural sector is the most important employment sector. And when there is drought, when there is erratic rainfall, then there's more pressure for women to be able to provide for their family. And sometimes girls leave school early so that they could help their mothers. So that's just a way of really concretizing how these things intersect and interact. And now that we have this evidence that we know that these things exist, we are now able to better inform policies and implement services and programs that address health needs in a localized manner. Okay, so now to strengthen our understanding of gender intersectionality, let's take the following cases as examples. So please let me read through each case, and as I read them, so there are 3 cases in total. As I read them, please think about 3 things: the health goals of each character or each person, the barriers they're facing, and the possible causes of these barriers. So our first character is Angel. So Angel heard from their friends that a group of reproductive health advocates are visiting their village. The group wanted to conduct a preliminary health research on adolescent health needs. They are looking for a diverse group, particularly adolescents who identify as members of the LGBTQIA community. Initially, Angel wanted to participate and be interviewed for the research. However, they have not disclosed their sexual orientation to their parents yet and are afraid of being found out and evicted from their house. So again, start thinking about Angel's health goals, the barriers, and the possible causes of these barriers. Now we go to another character, Elisa. So Elisa is a mother of 5. Recently, she has decided to avail of the birth control pills being offered at the village health office. However, due to her responsibilities at home, she never found the time to visit the office during their opening hours. Also worries about the possible reaction from her husband's conservative and religious family. So from here, again, please think of the health goals of Elisa, the barriers, and the possible causes of these barriers. Now we have the last character in the story. We have Tomas. So Tomas is Elisa's husband. He is being urged by his friends to avail of the free vasectomy in the village health office. Tomas is considering it, especially because of his low income. However, he does not want to be subjected to insults and teasing about his masculinity once he undergoes the procedure. He also heard from other people that the operation can be painful and that he might have to miss work to rest. So I would just like to point out that missing a day's work for Thomas is already a big thing. So this has important implications to his ability to provide for himself and his family. With this, let us now read through this table. So let me simplify it for you. Notice that each character has a unique or a different health goal. However, despite the difference in goals, they experience similar barriers such as lack of understanding or awareness, the influence of culture and religion, and financial difficulties and low income. Furthermore, these barriers are not attributed to only one cause. So there are a lot of causes, as we can see at the last column. And we would also notice that there are factors common across Elisa, Thomas, and Angel. For instance, we see that discrimination is something experienced not by just one gender. And so as we move forward with this presentation, please keep in mind that there are various and intersecting factors that influence health barriers. And with this, I give the floor to Abby for a discussion of the gender framework. Abby?
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Pauline, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, everyone, for your participation so far. In this next section, we will be asking you again to answer through Mentimeter. So we hope that you can keep participating in our presentation. So now we move forward to applying gender frameworks in social innovations in health. So first and foremost, what are frameworks? Frameworks are tools we can use for our research and are a starting point for incorporating gender analysis within research. They aid us in our organizing our thinking, framing our study, and focusing our data and analysis on key dimensions of gender relations most relevant to our study. So in simple terms, frameworks are a way for us, our guides, to help us critically analyze how gender influences whatever we want to study. Now, it's important to point out that there are many, many gender frameworks out there. And, a search in Google will yield you a lot of results. So this is just one example that we are going to use. This is from the TDR toolkit. We will be linking the toolkit towards the end of the presentation for everyone because it's a good resource. So this gender framework that we're going to use is gender as power relations that has 4 categories. First, access to resources. Second, division of labor and roles. Third, social norms and beliefs. And finally, rules and decision making. Now, these are the 4 categories as mentioned. So when we talk about access to resources, this answers the question, who has what? So for example, we can ask questions such as like, well, how are women able to access health services? Are they able to access the maternal health services or nutrition services for their children? And then you can also ask the question again about men. Are men able to access health resources? And then as we already discussed intersectionality, right? So gender intersects with other social stratifiers. So it can intersect with, let's say, disability or age. Then you can ask questions like, well, what about a disabled woman? Can she access services the same way that an able-bodied man can? So these are the types of questions and types of reflections and insights that come into when we ask about access to resources. Now, second, division of labor and roles. This answers the question, who does what? So in any given scenario, let's take a simple nuclear family, who does what? What does the mother do versus what does the father do versus what do the children do? And again, we go back to intersectionality. Well, then what would a disabled mother's roles look like compared to an able-bodied father? Or what about a disabled child? What roles do they have? And what types of activities do they do? So this gives us an insight on just how much labor a person does and what are the relationships that are built around them. Now, third, which is connected with the second, is social norms and beliefs. So how are values defined? So this we can ask, what are the expectations of men, of women, of people with non-binary identities, of children, of the elderly? What is socially expected of them? And social norms, these are types of things that in society they help guide society and we obey the rules of social norms. So what are these values and what are these beliefs that we hold on to? And then we will see that maybe, or we will find out just how different they are among gender identities. And finally, we ask on decision making, we ask who decides. So for example, what can a woman decide for herself if she wants to go through a medical procedure? What about a man? Can a man decide for himself if he wants to go through a medical procedure? Maybe Tomas, in our previous example, does he have the power to decide? And then we also have children, of course. Do they have the agency to exercise their health decisions for them, or do they rely on parents? So again, these are questions and that help us reflect through the 4 gender power relation categories. Now, I hope that was a little bit clear. I know it can be a bit quite a lot at the first try, but we will try now to apply this gender framework to our social innovation. Now, as Dr. Pauline mentioned earlier about the aid fee ramp pump. So this is the aid fee ramp pump. So you can see on the picture on the right. So this is what is called a ramp pump. It's a mechanical pump that is able to push water from low elevations to high elevations. So this enables people who live upland, so people live in mountains or hills, to no longer have to trek down. Again, as mentioned earlier, they had to trek down and up the mountain to be able to get water. So they no longer have to do that. So this is the social innovation of the aid fee ramp pump. Now, for our sample case that we'll use, we thought about introducing you guys to what kinds of communities the ramp pump helps, or, where does this social innovation operate? So I would like you to invite all of you to picture a rural village located in the Philippines or elsewhere where access to clean water is scarce. So the community members need to hike for more than an hour to fetch water from water sources such as rivers, springs for their everyday needs such as drinking, cooking, and sanitation purposes. Now, I would like to invite you to imagine the members of this community. The women, the men, again, as gender intersects with other social stratifiers, we can find other identities like elderly women, elderly men. What about disabled young girls or boys? What about an indigenous woman who may be living also with them? So imagine this kind of diverse community living somewhere in the mountains, and they have to trek hours for water. Now, in comes our 2 main characters, Rose and Ronald. So Rose is a 35-year-old woman and a mother of 3 living in the village. Rose is responsible for fetching water for her family multiple times a day, a task that consumes several hours of her time and energy. And Ronald is a 40-year-old man and a community leader who holds influence in decision-making processes related to infrastructure development and resource allocation. All right, so think about, again, Rose, Ronald, and the other community members in the rural upland village. Let's reflection based on the gender power relations. So we will do this one at a time. Again, I would like to invite you to the Menti, the same link. I will go there now. I hope you can see my screen and that it reflects the first gender power relation, which is access to resources. Now, I'd like you to think in this community, who has what? Who is able to access water? Who is able to access other types of resources? What do you think Rose has access to versus what Ronald has access to? Again, we are talking about water, but you can think about other things as well, such as maybe access to livelihood or access to income. So any response about that will be happy to see what you come up with in this sample case. So I'll give I'll give you a few minutes to think about who has what in this scenario. Okay, we have our first answer. Ronald has access to political power. Yes, that's correct. Those physically able can fetch water. Yes, that's true. So maybe those that are have physical disabilities may not be able to fetch water for themselves. That's correct. Right, anybody else? Again, we welcome all of your responses. There's no right or wrong answer. This is more of just to reflect on the situation of our community in the upland village. Ronald has power and agency, while Rose has knowledge about the issue. Yes, that's correct. Ronald is the planner. Ronald has access to free time. That is correct. Ronald has power and connection. That's true, because he holds influence in the community. Rose is vulnerable and has no power. Rose has access to water. Yes, that's true, because she hikes for the water. Everyone may have difficulty accessing healthcare and other resources due to their location. Yes, that's correct. Rose has the hard work. Ronald has the power. Rose has no power. Yes. All right. So thank you everyone for all wonderful answers and their assigned able to refine this category of resources. Now, on to the next question. Now, in this scenario, what does Rose do? Rest of the community, what do the women do? What do the men do? Perhaps what do children do? Dr. Pauline already mentioned some of these earlier. Yes, Rose fetches water and does the other household chores. Yes, that is correct. Yes, so Rose, like most of the women, are the ones responsible for fetching water. Takes care for family. Men go to work. Yes, probably farming or poultry. House chores. Ronald has the influence to change the situation. Yes. Rose has limited time to do other things like making her own money. That is true. Caregiving roles. Rose is in charge of basic household duties. Rose work never ends. I think a lot of working women can relate to that, yes? And Ronald coordinates and meets with other community leaders. Ronald earns money for the family. Okay. Ronald potentially organizes the community members through his influence. All right, these are wonderful answers. Thank you, everyone. Let's move on to our third category. Yes, thank you for all your answers. I'm sorry I can't read through all of them. So let's move on. We're still using the same link, all right? So how are values defined? Now let's think about what are the expectations. Again, this is very related to the last question that we had. So what is the expectation for a woman like Rose? Or what is the expectation for a man like Ronald? You can, again, think outside the main characters. You can think about maybe what's expected of elderly, maybe of children. Yes, okay. Women are expected to tend to the family. Yes, that is correct. Rose has to take care of the children at home. Again, yes. Men are expected to provide. Yes. Rose is expected to ensure basic necessities are available. Yes. So women as homemakers, men as decision makers. They maintain a status quo. Men wield decision-making powers. Yes. Men are expected to bring in money. Community elders are listened to for their wisdom. That's a wonderful insight. Thank you for that. So if you're a community elder, they often look up to you and are listened to for wisdom. And Ronald can provide guidance and support. As a woman, we are expected to be the core caregivers at home, and men are expected to handle provision for the family. Yes, so we can think of Rose and Ronald in that way. Rose is expected to nurture the family preparation of food. Yes, that is also correct. All right. Thank you everyone for all your answers. They were very insightful. Communities are often victims of lower representation decision. That's a wonderful answer. Yes, certain community members or certain communities as a whole, if they are in rural and upland villages, they have lower decision-making power. Okay, so thank you again for your answers. Now we move to the last one. I'm sorry, we're running a bit out of time. Who decides? Now, this may be a bit obvious based on the Campbell case, but yes, who decides? What does Ronald have decisions over? What does Rose have decision over? You can also think of other members of the community. Who gets to decide what in this community? Free Rose. That's very funny. Okay. So we say that yes, Ronald has more power in terms of decision making. Rose has less. Anybody else would like to give a wonderful response? Yes, Ronald. Rose has the power to neglect home care. Does she though? Can she though? We'll see. Rose decides on how to manage her home. That's correct, because the domestic responsibilities fall under her. Rose about the family, Ronald about the village. Yes, all right. Both have power. That's true. Both have power, just different kinds and different levels. Both decide. Rose can communicate about what she thinks, but probably the man makes decisions. You know, there are a lot of studies that do support that while women can communicate their positions, it's still the men in certain communities that have the decision-making power. So thank you for that. Ronald has the power to influence better decisions. Elders make community decisions. Again, that's true. And that's true for a lot of rural and smaller villages. Ronald's decisions affect the community. Rose's decision is for her home. All right. So thank you everyone for your responses. I think in all of the questions, we have found a certain trend, right? We are able to see who does what, who is able to access to what are the expectations for people of different gender identities, and who is able to make the decisions. So thank you all for that. Now I'm just moving back to the slides. Yes, so I won't go through this because everyone has already pretty much had the answered, but this is supposed to be a table to synthesize our answers. But I think everyone has a great idea and clear idea of what already, or how to think with the framework that we have. So let's move forward. So in summary, the case of Rose, Ronald, and the community members highlights the unequal distribution of power and resources. Gender power domains, including access to water sources, decision-making authority, and control over resources, shape the lived experiences of community members and impact their ability to access clean water. And of course, it's never just water. It's about health, it's about livelihood, and also about education. Now, with that in mind, now that we have a nice, clear picture of the community that we want to help, what do social innovations do? All right. So social innovations in health must account for the intersecting identities and gender power relations. All those insights that we had, social innovators should be fully aware that these things affect people in different ways. So in this case, the social innovators of AIDFI were fully aware that the lack of water makes people disadvantaged in multiple ways. It impacts both health and livelihood, as well as social relationships. So they already come in with these good insights about the community before they even begin. Now, what were the innovative solutions that they implemented with the AIDFI ramp pump? Now, there are sort of two sides to the coin. First is the technological innovation, and the second is what we call social preparation. So technical innovation is the ramp pump itself. If you remember the picture I showed you a few slides earlier, that's the ramp pump. So it's the physical, mechanical pump that is being used to transfer water from lower elevations to higher elevations. But in order to make this a a community-based solution wherein all members of the community are involved, there should be social preparation. So in social preparation, they knew that they needed to involve not just the men, but the women, especially the elderly, and also the children. So everyone is involved in the social preparation. They introduce capacity building initiatives and enterprise training sessions so that the members of the community know how to maintain and sustain their ramp pump. And as mentioned by Dr. Pao, I think earlier, this involves building local water associations. So this is a very democratic process wherein community members elect and decide among themselves who will be the ones to represent them in a board and their officers. And the great news here is that mostly women are the ones involved. So, and also to mention that the installation and the maintenance of the ramp pump uses local materials so that they don't need to go outside of their locale to be able to find parts and necessary materials to repair or to maintain the ramp pump. They're all locally available. So because of this, what are the outcomes? Well, the obvious outcome in there's availability of clean water. So now we go back to who has access to what. Before, they were only able to access water, those with able-bodied, those who did not have disabilities were the only ones who could fetch water. Women were the ones who were fetching water most of the time. Now everyone has access to clean water at the same time. The second is the sustainability of water systems. Again, because of the capacity building and the enterprise training sessions, they are able to maintain their water system and manage it themselves. Now, there's an element of community empowerment here, of course, because these communities did not have clean water before, and they were not able to have these new roles, these new leadership roles, and these new social relations that formed because of the new ramp pump system. And finally, again, as I mentioned, because local water associations were really transformative for the women. So for the first time, perhaps in their scenario, they are able to have new responsibilities and roles that were not there before. And now they have access to knowledge and social networks, unlike previously where they didn't have those resources. Okay, so in the interest of time, this was supposed to be an activity that we would like, again, your input. But now let's just make this a reflective question as we end our presentation. So now that we have learned all of these, could you think about a healthcare need in your community? So how do gender power relations intersect with other social stratifiers to create inequities in accessing this healthcare need? So think about, again, how gender interacts perhaps with age, with location, with race, with class, with socioeconomic status. How do these things intersect, these factors intersect to affect this healthcare need? And the second question that you can think about as we end this presentation is, how can social innovations in health address this need? So we already saw the example of the HV ramp pump. They were able to do so. So how can other social innovations address the health need that you're thinking about? Okay. So to end, we have our three key messages. The first is the aim of an intersectional gender approach is to highlight the various intersecting identities and exposing diverse forms of disadvantage that arise from the intersection of sex and gender with other factors. Two, the application of an intersectional gender lens highlights the importance of understanding gender dimensions of social innovations in health at a community level. So it really does bring us back to the point that we need these kinds of understanding with the help of gender frameworks so that we are able to understand the lived experiences more of community members. And finally, that researchers and social innovators working with communities need to have a deeper understanding of gender and intersecting stratifiers when conducting community needs assessment and designing interventions. Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to listen to us. This is a slide of our resources. As we mentioned, you can take a screenshot, or maybe one of us can put the links, provide you in the chat box. So if you want to learn more about intersectional gender analysis, TDR has a wonderful toolkit about it. And if you want to learn more about the Aid Fee Ramp Pump project, this is their website. Thank you once again. We would like to acknowledge our lead co-investigators and project manager, Doctors Del Pilar Labarda, Mir Alpaño, Tiongson Muego, and Otmani Del Barrio. And once again, we thank you all for taking the time and spending this 1 hour with us.
Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you, Dr. Abigail and Dr. Pauline. I think I have really learned a lot from your presentation, from your lecture, especially about the intersectional analysis and how gender power relation intersect with other social stratifiers. So yes, and thank you for delivering such an interesting session. And I also want to say thank you, your